have two special guests today to give us some talks about spectroscopy. One of them is quite a special guest for me, and I will explain why. So I just first like to know the names. So it's Professor Roland Kreis from the University of Bern, and then the next speaker will be Rudy, sorry, yeah, I'm going to do that. The next speaker will be Rudy, and Rudy is a former PhD student of Roland, and it was a pleasure working with him. Yeah, not very closely, but still working with him and having him in the Inspire Med European project. So it's where I somehow met Rudy. It was also a little bit during COVID at the beginning, and afterwards it was a little bit better. That was before and after COVID. And but going back to Roland, I try to remember when I've met Roland and what happened with Roland. Well, yeah, not me and Roland. Yeah, let's put it like this. So I remember that I was looking for a PhD, for a postdoc. And then Roland was one of the persons that I was thinking about. And then finally, I didn't went to his lab. But I remember that I was giving my first talk at ICMR as a PhD student towards the end. So I had a 2-minute talk. So it was fast, my first talk. And Roland was there in the room before starting my talk, but then he left for a specific reason. I was so disappointed. I remember that Chris Bosch, he stayed. He was one of the chairs. He asked me a question. And then I was so excited and the answer for the question was tough. Then finally I said, yeah, better that he left. Because seeing me bring the answer was, yeah, so amazing. Then I first invited the talk at ICMR 2 years later as a postdoc. It was on quantification. And I think that I forgot to let you know that Roland is a well-known expert on camera lower bounds quantification of both the MR spectrum, human brain, but also acquisition and diffusion. So then I gave a talk, and it was an early morning course, and I was so excited, but also so stressed that he's in the room. And I'm talking about quantification. I was mentioning his paper, all the artifacts, because his paper on artifacts is a Bible of artifacts in total spectroscopy. So it's like this more or less that I met him, and then with the time we were together in the Transact project, and then in the Inspire Med project, and then we started working with him, so some joint papers. Mainly because of Jesse. So yeah, I have the sort of role on how I've met him and how I remember him. So each time I try to, and then I even told you in Luba last year a part of the story I don't remember. So yeah, it's always a pleasure for me to have him around and to learn from him. I'm always learning from him. So I hope that you will also learn something today from his talk, and then Rudy will come bring the cherries on the cake, so the last plate. Roland, the Zoom, the floor, everything for you now.
Thank you. I think there's 5 minutes left now. For and I'm very happy to be here, of course. This talk was actually, first we were invited, why don't maybe Rudy could come and talk a bit about metabolite cycling, and we said, oh yeah, why not? And then we developed into maybe something a little bigger. Yeah, let's have a full talk. And all of a sudden she asked for a bio sketch to distribute it all over EPFL or whatever. Anyway, it was nice to be invited. And luckily I found an old presentation which fit into this, so I did not invent everything this to it. Anyway, it's about the water signal in MRS. And of course, the water signal, all of MRI is about water, 95% probably. So water is important, and all the MRI guys like the water. And why is it that spectroscopists don't like it? Maybe they don't like big guys, they like small guys, or I don't know. One reason might be that it's just a very big signal. As you see here, this is the water signal, the spectrum from brain. This is what we see if you don't do anything about it, just localize it. This is the water signal, and slides, some of you may probably have seen it because I've been using it for decades almost. It's this one, comparison of the water signal to the metabolite signals. The size of the water signal would be Kilimanjaro, and the size of the biggest metabolite signal is the size of the trunk of an elephant. And so symbolizing that, yes, it's overwhelming, this water signal. That, of course, is one reason why spectroscopists don't like the water. Now, the trouble is it's even worse. because if you look into details, if you look at single acquisition, this is from the Terra scanner, brain spectrum, single shot. This is again the water, and you see that the water doesn't really have this nice symmetric line shape. There's some bumps here, and those bumps, I'm afraid, these are not the metabolites. These are just sidebands. If you scale it up times 6, you see that the line shape really is horrible, and these are bumps, out of phase, negative, positive. So that's another reason why we don't like the water signal, because those signals, if you compare them to metabolites, the blue line here is actually the size of metabolites. So it's really, if you blow this up, metabolites are much smaller than all these artifacts if you do non-water suppressed spectroscopy, depending on the sequence, on eddy currents, and others. But this is a mixed brain in our scan. So this is water with sidebands versus metabolites. Now, of course, eddy currents rings a bell for most of you. Eddy currents you can correct. And if you do look at the old literature, Rudy Rizzo once in late 80s invented the eddy current correction. You can use the line shape from water, so this is the first benefit of the water signal. You can actually use the water signal to correct artifacts which you also have on the metabolite signal. And on the metabolite signal, that is horrible line shape, and you can correct. Looking back, this is a horrible spectrum up here, but it's not a really good spectrum down here either. But of course, you do recover the doublet here and the quartet here of lactate in this solutions. And this is eddy current correction just using the phase of the walls. And if you do eddy current correction in this case here, you can actually then see, if you do phase-based eddy correction, this out-of-phase signal becomes a nice in-phase signal. And this comparison really gets you a very nice brain spectrum. But you actually see that, I mean, the big artifacts are gone, but you still have some artifacts left, which are still sort of the, could be the size of, if you only do it phase-based eddy correction. That means you can do something else. Bimbo, PhD advisor on Stockholm, he invented this quality method where you also use the amplitude of the water signal, and you see here, up here you have this asymmetric line shape, low up here, and if you then use essentially division through the water signal, you can get to a very nice symmetry. So there are ways to use the water signal also to convert the horrible line shape into a nice line shape. So that's sort of what I call the old use or the common use of the unsuppressed water signal is eddy current correction based on phase, Rudy Rizzo, line shape deconvolution from Bimbo, or of course also quantification using the water signal as an internal standard for your metabolism. What I'm so the newer way of using the unsuppressed water is what I list here: model line shape model fitting, frequency reference, use in case of motion, talk about exchange, and also diffusion with MRS. And these are people involved. This is a very selfish talk. I'm just talking about all the applications I've done. I'm not mentioning any projects. Very sorry. Except for the first. Yeah, so this line shape, I mentioned you can essentially use the water signal and divide by the water signal, that you can recover a nice line shape, often or Lorentzi, whatever you do. But the trouble is, if you divide through the water signal goes into the noise, the restored metabolite will explode. And so what we proposed at one stage was the normal thing here is you have line shape from water, you correct the metabolite signal with that line shape, and you fit the corrected signal with the ideal model. Our way was that we have the enhanced model approach. We take the line shape from water, we apply the line shape to the model spectra, and then we fit the distorted signal with the distorted model. So that's another way of using water signal. This was Victor Atalit who implemented that. So here you see, actually it was also DJ Rudy. First echo and last echo, also this out of phase stuff, undistorted with asymmetric heavy distortion of 25 Hertz, you arrive here. And if you look at the results, the only thing I mentioned is here's the bias for areas undistorted, you have a little bit less than 1% bias. If you don't do a correction, you have 8% bias. If you do this modeling that we use, you get back to 4%, but of course, it doesn't work perfectly either, but it's still. Okay, another potential use of the water signal was from Rudy, student in the former European project. What we did there was we thought, okay, perhaps we want to know the errors of your modeled spectrum. And you can only get the errors once you have the data. Of course, once you have the data, it's too late to decide to do more acquisitions because then this patient has left. And it would be nice to know ahead of time how long you have to acquire and whether it's worth having the patient in the magnet in the first place. So what we said we could, to use a single shot water signal, take the line width and the SNR of the water from there, and knowing the model for the modeling, we can calculate Kramer-Rao bounds, so the errors, metabolite content, and once known line shape, we can actually forecast how much CRLVs we get for all metabolites from a single water shot in the beginning. So here see what we predict from based on the water signal is along the y-axis, and what we actually measure if we record the data is along the x-axis. You can see that prediction works quite well. This is total creatine. If you look at the metabolites, it looks not the same. Almost an unbiased estimate. Of course, it's not the true Kramer-Raus, but it's a nice forecast of what you would get with a certain number of acquisitions, and then you can just before you actually do it. Other way of using the water signal is now for these three items. I'm talking about simultaneous acquisition of water and metabolites. So now you could have used a separately acquired water shot. And simultaneous acquisition comes from metabolite cycling. What is metabolite cycling? This is the normal spectroscopy sequence. You do water suppression, resaturate the water, and you apply your data, press, set amylase, whatever. What you could do is get rid of water suppression, and instead you do the adiabatic inversion of part of your spectrum. This says inversion of metabolites, which means this is taken from the graphs book. You have this spectrum here, and you do an inversion, let's say, of the upfield part, the right of water. Then you get water signal, and you get the sidebands from the water signal, but you get a negative metabolite contribution here. You do the same thing, but invert on the left side. Then on the right side, you still get water signal, you get sidebands positive, you get metabolites positive. You take a difference, you get the metabolites, you take the sum of the two, you get the water. This is the metabolite cycling technique that for the rest of the talk essentially. And Rudy will go into some details about how this is correct. One obvious use of that is if you really have a high SNR signal now for each shot, not the water suppress only, you can do frequency alignment of your shots. So this is for the liver, for brain with some motion, moderate, severe motion. And of course, then you can align these and you can get that nice line shape if you add them up. Just an example from the liver. This is very Macmillan, long time ago, 2011, a poster that time. So if you just do the straight addition, this is the lipid signals here, you can see the red one. If you do this alignment, you get the blue one. And of course, that's narrow or higher SNR. You can also notice up this region, the metabolite region, or this CH2 peaks of lipids, which are better separated to show also this property. Of course, you can also align spectra if it's well suppressed. As long as you have enough signal to noise, like in this case, simulated, but essentially that would be the case with the brain spectrum with high signal noise, a large ROI. You can also align those spectra without having to refer to the water. So then you can frequency line all the FIVs, you sum them up, and everything's fine. This example was for the spinal cord, which we did in PTH with uncapped pending at that time. The single shot for the spinal cord looks like that. There's no big peak, so you cannot align them. So in that case, it's nice to have the water signal, and you can align based on water signal. And hooray, you get better results spectra. This is a single case, this is somewhat multiple subjects. Also get higher peaks, hopefully better SR. So it's about cycling, frequency alignment is primarily for small signals. Small signals would also be for editing. At the post-1 stage, you do the same trick for edited spectra, where again you have small signals and better reference. Okay. Next on the list of why I like the monosignal spectroscopy is you can look at exchange. What do you mean with that? So instead of doing just the press with the inversion, like cycling, you can add an inversion pulse, some inversion time before you do this, and then you can invert selectively the water magnetization, and you can observe what happens with that magnetization being transferred to some of the. This is Danny McMillan at 3T that time. This is the downfield spectrum with left of water. And so this spectrum will be without the inversion pulse. And now I will show you spectra with inversion pulse at different times for exchange. So this is the shortest exchange time, then the longer exchange times. You see for these peaks here, really the full magnetization is coming from water onto these metabolite peaks. That's why the signals decrease and then come back up one inversion time. This series of experiments can then plot the data as a measure of conversion time. Then you evaluate with funnel modeling. You get T1s and you get exchange lifetimes. And you see that for these peaks here, you have very short lifetimes, and for these slower exchange. That's another neat way of using water signal. Essentially, you can do that also on upfield spectrum. Now in brain, there's not very much exchange to the upfield spectrum. In muscle, that's a bit different. So if you look at the muscle, this is the arterial muscle, aligned at the magic angle. I mean, the muscle fibers aligned at the magic angle. That's the spectrum here. This is without inversion. I'm now showing you the differences with respect to this. If I do an inversion, take the difference. Then you see if I do a very short inversion, the difference is small because there's no exchange happening. But the more the exchange happens, you actually see that you have quite a big difference. You have direct exchange from water onto the creatine signals, and you also see that the CH2 has a faster exchange. You already have a 50 milliseconds inversion time. You already have a big difference. Fast exchange here and the slow exchange here. The same thing. This is magic angle, as I said. This is the parallel alignment. Muscle there, you have a complication of this type of printed out, but the differences are just the same. It's the same muscle applications. Okay, that was with metabolite cycling. With metabolite cycling, you still do a normal MRS experiment with selecting the water. That is, you really disturb the water overall. You can also do experiments without touching the water. Then we talk of MRS without water excitation. Not just not suppressed, but not excited at all, which means it stays along the Z direction all the time, and it's there in a permanently stable Z mechanization pool of reservoir for whatever it's doing. This is one experiment, ICSE, which I stands for ISIS, so essentially do an ISIS localization instead of a press second laser, which means everything stays along Z. And then the excitation essentially can shift selective pulses. In this case, it's a spin echo, where both pulses can be shift selected, and we try not to touch the water. We only excite scheme to recover the metabolite spectrum. And here you would have results for that. Again, looking at the downfield part. You see that now these two peaks, which were exchanging very fast, what you saw in the previous slides, they are now in this spectrum acquired with this non-excitation technique. Those peaks are very, very big compared to what we have in a water suppressed semi-laser or metabolite cycling semi-laser. You can see now that there's no exchange whatsoever for those peaks. They are actually much better, also shorter. So that means this, you can even look at those exchange components in more detail with more signal. Funny thing is, you may think this is something new. We published that in 2020. In 1998, I had a poster on that, but I just remember never published that, which actually the different spectrum down here between non-water excited spectroscopy and with water saturation reminds quite a lot of what we published. So not always very the last thing, or almost last thing on this exchange stuff, you can also do assessed experiment with metabolite cycling and to assess interval before your spectroscopy and look at assessed on water and assessed on metabolites. The results for water were as expected. You get the Z spectrum with different components, NOEs, OH, NH components, fit all that. Then you can also look at the metabolites. You have a metabolite test. Unfortunately, there was not very clear results on that. We would get any transfer of mechanization from any other component than from water, not even from water. Principally, you can have all the free controls. Is it? Okay, last item on the list before I move to Rudy. Coming back to corrections that you can do with using water reference. That is now diffusion weighted MRS. And here we also want to use the amplitude of water signal as amplitude reference. So we do diffusion weighted MRS. You do obviously MR scans and spectroscopy scans with different B factors, different diffusion weight of the MRI. And you see here, if you do that with B values from 100 to 5,000, you see the NAA signal dropping from big signal to a small signal. All as well. This is in the brain. Now, if you do metabolite cycling, sorry, you also get also the same information, the same scan, also the water, which is going. Good thing now is you can use this water reference for corrections. You look at shot by shot acquisitions at the fairly high V value. You will see that the amplitude of the water signal, also the metabolite signals, is not the full amplitude all the time. You have motion, you have rotation of the brain, and that immediately leads to reduction of amplitudes. And so you can look at the water signal, which is highest MR. You will see that some of those signals are lower than expected. You know that motion will lead to loss of signal, not to increased signal, so that you can use the highest signal as a reference, or this as a reference level, and you can correct all the signals which have less signal. You increase, scale it up to the reference level, and then therefore essentially you restore the non-motion effective amplitudes. Of course, very bad spectrum you could throw out because you think probably here it's something else has gone on, and we might also if you look at the water signal with this correction, you go uncorrected, corrected. You see that high B value for low B values, the small correction. High B values is a bigger correction, and the same thing. Spectra after correction, you will see that built-in. You have to go up for A actually. See that always the p-value spectra, you get a much nicer line shape. And between K, if you look at the results, you actually see that the ADC, which is estimated, is always smaller with the correction, because otherwise they have this dummy motion induced contribution. With this, I'm done. Take-home message for you for the first part. Take-home message is that can't have your cake and eat it, but it may be different.
Yeah,
Yes,
very good talk. I have one question because I'm not too familiar with it, so it's really just a question from ignorance. So when you show that there is a difference in the magnetization transfer from water to metabolites, you show that there are some metabolites that show different transfer, right, depending on the time, and depending on the waiting time between your conversion pulse and your anabolic pulse. What does it actually mean between those biological? So what is the meaning of seeing that certain metabolites have more exchange with?
I mean, that's a difficult question, actually. I mean, the reasons for transfer are manifold. You can actually have protons exchanging, so you have OH or NH protons, acidic protons, they can actually move to water and from metabolite to water and reverse. Or you can actually have certain magnetization transfer, which acts through multiple steps, maybe within the molecule first, and then from an OH group to water. And all these processes at different speed. So you sort of look into what's happening on molecular level.
So really processes,
but there's no straight indication. Okay, now I diagnose whatever HV or perceive or clear meaning to it.
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question for, well, a very nice presentation, thank you. I have a question for the water, the spectroscopy without water excitation. I was wondering which kind of pulses you were using for it, and what is the minimal echo time you managed to achieve with this technique?
It's different depending whether you use spin echo or the chemical shift selective pulses. I think with the spin echo, we used very common Gauss weighted pulses. And we had something like something like that. Depends on what bandwidth you choose. Nicely, you want to be selective. We also did without an echo, use the vertical pulse, where you have just essentially it's a self-refocusing pulse, and you have a delay of a couple of milliseconds or 1 millisecond, and really get very short times there. Disadvantage, then you really do a 3D ISIS, and the ISIS for proton spectroscopy is not ideal. So you always be sensitive to motion and different artifacts. And you can get a very short.
Thank you.
Other question?
Just on the same topic, could we do non-integration of the water with the metabolite cycle pulse?
Cycle pulse is the inversion pulse, so you don't really excite them.
What could we do? Because for now, the metabolite cycling also inverse the.
Oh, you mean the.
Can we just could we shift it to not invert the water region? Invert, for example, just the uphill part, and then do the sequence. And then shift the carrier frequency.
Yeah, but for what purpose?
Not to touch the water at all in the metabolite cycling.
Yeah, but I mean, in metabolite cycling, you do the normal localization of the touch group. So you have to replace the excitation pulse with something. So you need a chemical shift to get the excitation, which normally is slightly up with pulse. And there you cannot just really if you would do a spatial spectral pulse, you could do it. Then you would replace the normal slice select pulse with a spatial spectral excitation pulse, where you don't excite. It's possible, but those are usually a bit longer, and often here we want to get a very short T and do that. You can use the conversion pulse from tablet cycling for inverting and see transfer manifestations.
Can I also explain another question on the first part?
As the last speaker.
Yes. On the when you showed the correction for the distortion line, you said that applying the distortion to the basis set was giving less light than correcting the occlusion.
Well, what I showed was we did not compare quality versus or linear. We compared not correcting it all versus length. Then we got less bias. But in that case, we did not really do a quality where we divide by water and then get what comes out. Should have been fairer to compare it on.
I kind of have a question. He doesn't know me so well, and he doesn't have to teach. I always have this question. Can we measure ammonia in a brain who has a lot of who's supposed to have a lot? So, which we have to look at.
15 probably.
Yeah. And I couldn't measure that. I think I was not smart enough at that time. No, but with the appetite side.
You want to see the protons?
Yeah.
You know where the rest.
No, I was wondering if you know maybe if we go down to maybe
They resonate around 8 somethings,
Yeah.
7 somethings, between 7 somethings, 8 somethings. That depends on the pH.
Yeah, because I remember.
You read out.
Yeah, you are not supposed to be a
Or your site real attack is considered with
yeah, that's how
best.
that's what, yeah, because I was wondering because we don't we cannot measure ammonia in the brain. So we usually measure it in the blood, and this called as ratio. I have a lot of people asking, can you measure it in the brain? So yeah, we've never implemented it that way scientific side.
That's a matter of the tablet side. It's, or you think it's changing with
Yeah,
water.
it changed, yeah, that's
Then
water.
you would do a non.
Oh,
Then it
no.
would be this non-water
Oh, no.
excitation. That might be an idea just to try that on your face. Instead of seeing.
I was just afraid, yeah, not saying I'm
I don't know how
sure.
much seeing you get.
I don't know. Thank you. So yeah, you all see Rudy Rizzo. So now I understand why I mixed the name at the beginning.
That's not weird.
No, it's not. But I was at least. So yeah, so Rudy was a PhD student, so now he's a very well graduated PhD student and not student, yeah, he's a PhD now. And he will be very soon going to the United States to his postdoc. So he was in the experiment project, as I already mentioned, this European project where we met Jesse and other SVG, and they all had, I hope, some fun. And I had the pleasure to see the talks before during this project. I really love them. Yeah, especially the one with your traveling around in the world, the one that we did in Barcelona. I really loved it. So yeah, since he's a very good speaker, and since he did a very nice job with his PhD, I invited him over to share with us a little bit of his thoughts, a little bit of his work.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction, for having me. Welcome to the second half of this talk. And I'm freshly graduated. I'm actually enjoying summer break, so I'm good to be here today. I've been working with Roland, and I learned in the last 2 years to be a good friend of water. So I thought to bring you a couple of examples of our friendship with water And Roland gave us already like quite some theoretical background and multiple approaches that we can actually, by which we can exploit the water signal. So I thought I challenged myself on giving you a live hands-on approach to treat water peak and metabolic cycling, and we'll go through it very soon. And then the other two, part two, part three, so to say, of my talk would be two applications of metabolic cycling together with water suppression and metabolic cycling for running this retrospective motion compensation, but for prostate, because I like it, don't know. So let's look into this hands-on. I'm using a semi-laser data set. You can see my mouse. Yeah, you can see the metabolic cycling block early on here, and then you have the adiabatic localization and the very long FAD quite a bit again. I'll be using data I've acquired years ago in the occipital cortex. It's a rather big voxel, if you wish. It will have 64 shots. And it's basically a 3T, so it's a prisma scanner as seen. I'm just like showing you how the data, the raw data, well, not raw data, but ISO reconstructed data looks like. I'll do some phase and frequency alignment with the water peak as reference, eddy current. We didn't even mention the difference between a pure water shot and a metabolic cycle reconstructed water shot. They're different. And I'll show you how they're different and why you should always use a water shot to do quantification. And perhaps let's skip this advanced MC post processing, but in case there are other ways to announce your data. For this purpose, I'm just jumping into Juma UI and load this data set. So we will be looking at data that looks like this. So we have the water peak at about 4.7 here for 64 signals. So these are our 64 averages. Then we align them on 0, so you can, on 4.7, sorry, you can look at the data, they look already quite nice. There's no offset in frequency. We can look at their variation in intensity, they're quite reliable over the 64 averages. And then if we then jump into this, let me do this. If we then jump into the ppm range of interest, you will start seeing the metabolites spinning up and down according to the inversion pulse. So if the NAA be about 2 ppm, will be for 32 signals upwards and for the other 32 signals downwards. So if we get back here, we can run simple hard phase. So we go phasing signals according to the water peak. So this algorithm will automatically look at the maximum value and align them. And then we will do some frequency shift. Again, here align automatically keeps looking at the max value. Our signals are well aligned, and then I can just average them out. And this is our water peak. So water, usually, especially in our case, is affected by eddy current. One can look at eddy current plotting the phase. Yeah, I want to show you. You see this like non-linear phase variations early on. This is exactly eddy current. It's a nice way to look at them in this case where the signal in frequency domain was already nice and quite symmetric, if you wish. So then I can save the signal and then use it to correct for the water cycle. This one, water. Save. Then I will go back to the 64 averages. They are already phase and frequency corrected. And what I need to do now, I need to flip the even shots upward in such a way that the next time I do averaging, the water will be gone and I will only have the metabolites. For doing so, I prepared myself this list of numbers that I will briefly need. I go here, I do multiply with the scalar, I select only the even numbers and multiply them by -1, and then you see all the metabolites are upward. If I go back, I will have half of the water pointing downwards, plain average again. There you go, you have the metabolites popping up. But in this case, I still have eddy current. So eddy current artifact. So what I do, I just run a correct phase with reference file to pick my water signal. And now the correction was mild, but it has been run. I can therefore run an SVD filtering get rid of the residual water. There you go. You have your metabolites. This was a plain approach. Doesn't require much. You're safe and sound that they've run eddy current correction with the same shot that has been acquired during the full acquisition of the metabolites themselves as well. I wanted as well to show you a little bit what's the difference between a water reconstructed by metabolic cycling and the water that comes right away from a single shot. And for this purpose, I'll graph these two signals and I'll show you the magnitude, not the real one. So the lower signal is the metabolite cycle reconstructed water shot, and it's 25% lower than the single shot. And if you do metabolite quantification reference to the water signal, you have to consider the signal loss, because as soon as you run this inversion process, you'll be affecting a set of protons with the water that is in exchange with downfield metabolites. So the signal will be reduced. So the recommendation is always use metabolite cycling for post-processing, phase correction, eddy current correction, phase alignment, but run a very single shot. It's going to cost you a few seconds to get full quantification in millimole there. Okay, with that, I will move back to my presentation. So on one hand, metabolite cycling takes care of water suppression, one could believe. We've seen before, I have very little residual water, I can run an HLSPD filter and I get rid of that and I only have metabolites. But there are practical approaches where you cannot run an HLSPD filter. So perhaps metabolite cycling and water suppression together could be suitable. And the specific example in my case is not about sidebands as others have been doing, but it's about signal truncation. We have developed an approach in which we truncate the very long FID to few milliseconds. And when you have few milliseconds, time domain signals, you cannot really fit it with a Lorentzian decay. Hence, you cannot run a singular value decomposition to get rid of the water. To give you a visual example, are again occipital cortex data, similar as before, at 35 milliseconds, but truncated right after 56 milliseconds. So instead of acquiring the very long FID, we chop the signal here. You can see it's a Fourier transform, so its spectra will be undersampled a little bit. But in this case, one can get rid of the water sitting right here. If I truncate the signal even further, about 8 milliseconds, so looking at the former time domain signal, now I'm truncating the signal right here. I would expect in frequency domain to see the water contribution still present here because I have so few data points that I cannot filter them away. As a matter of fact, what you observe is something like this. As soon as you run a repeatability study, 5 times you acquire your data from the same volunteer, you would observe the water deteriorating your data set at about 4.6, 4.7 ppm in such a way that the broadening are so big that they cover the already very low resolve spectra you would have at very short TE. So this is this is an extreme problem because it brings in residual water. So it is a signal that you don't know the way it is processed. You don't know the way it affects your signal. It has a strong variability and it's very tricky to model for a final quantitative outcome. In our experience, it moves you away from the convergence of standard deviation to Cramer lower bounds when you test your system for repeatability. So one sits in this situation, but wishes to be in the other one on the right, where the water variation as measured by ±1 standard deviation is minimal. So the idea was, okay, we add water suppression to even reduce further the contribution of residual water. And this is done by, in our case, by extension of by a chess block, typical chemical shift selective saturation of water. that acts early on before the metabolite cycling pulse. Comparing how the signal look like, you have on the left top row water saturation and metabolic cycling. You see the pure water signal is now reduced to 12.5, so to say, whereas the simple or straightforward approach with metabolic cycling only has the pure water shot at about 100 times higher, so to say. Indeed, here you struggle to see the metabolites sitting in their chemical shift ranges. At the bottom, I just spread over 4 averages to show you that there's still this flipping up and down, and you can easily detect metabolites again when you run water suppression. On the other hand, though, you have to, for metabolic cycling on, you have to zoom in to properly see this flipping up and down. So when you suppress the water, but not too much, you still have this good SNR signal that you can use for post-processing. So you can do coil combination, you can do phase frequency alignment, you can do eddy current correction. However, it's not that big. So we hope that in averaging, the contribution that remains here, this residual water, will be smaller. And it's exactly as expected. If you compare the reconstructed metabolite signal, you'll see that MC only leads to a 17.5 residual water intensity, whereas CHES and metabolite cycling will give you a pretty smaller contribution of residual water. And here is announced as well. So in our case, the data I've been showing you before, that was the dreaming setup, was indeed the data we recorded with CHES and metabolic cycling. So you can see, and it's hard to see here, but the SD range is very, very minimal. So in certain setups, you can twin your a metabolic cycling pulse with a water suppression for benefit of water contamination in the reconstructed spectrum. At least a little bit of motion compensation with metabolite cycling for diffusion-weighted spectroscopy in the prostate. So the idea of measuring diffusion-weighted MRS in prostate goes with diffusion-weighted imaging in prostate is a game changer for prostate cancer. And it has never been tried diffusion-weighted MRS in inner organs. So we knew nothing. We didn't have any reference for ADC values. We knew that prostate features protein complexation and high on ion dependencies on metabolic pathways. And we didn't know anything about pathological changes as well. So we decided, okay, we have a system that provides robust motion compensation for inner organs. And for inner organs, I mean, you cannot ask for more than abdominal inner organs. They move a lot. You have blood filling, you have gases, you have a digestion going on. So it is really a challenge. And for the purpose of today, I don't want to show any results, but mostly I want to show how the motion compensation linked to water works a bit, and the profit we have for prostate specifically. The method was a simple steam sequence, 33 milliseconds at TE, and we acquired 6 p-values up to 25.5 milliseconds. Where in the healthy cohort, we also have some data for patients. You see the beauty of the prostate that sits here. You have this peripheral zone, central gland. It's a single voxel experiment, so you cannot really distinguish between these two heterogeneous tissue types. And with the water, the acquisition of simultaneous water by metabolic cycling, we've seen we have this high SNR reference that is like pretty suitable for quality enhancement. And we've seen it before, phase frequency correction. Motion compensation, as Roland briefly discussed before, takes care of certain shots, like your B2, where the water signal is lower than expected. That means there is a signal cancellation out of motion. And this will affect your fit of ADC by outliers. Here you can see these two averages, average number 2 and 4, affecting the fit at p-value, the second p-value, so to say. So the idea is like, okay, we identify these motion affected shots. We identify a reference, and we scale up be affected by motion shocks. In that way, you would have like a motion compensated average water, but as well the motion compensated average metabolite spectrum. So doing, you will see this p values that they will be rounded up, they will be closer to the expected forward, if you wish, and drive therefore a more reliable, more accurate, if you wish. That was a great example. Going to prostate, here I report on the top a very low p value, almost no diffusion weighting applied here, and the highest p value we could measure for prostate. Again, you have the pure water signal shock on the top and the bottom. You can also compare the intensity. You can mark already the diffusivity of water going to higher p values. And what it is interesting to start with is the metabolites SNR. Already, like with no diffusion weighting, one struggles to see single shots metabolites. With a high diffusion weighting, you basically just look at north. So, as Ron before mentioned, it is really crucial to reference to water in this case for any type of correction you wanna run on your data, because you would have no measure to correct for looking at metabolites. Then, if you look at the signal amplitude for 32 averages, so just like observing how water evolves for 32 shots, we see, again, as Roland mentioned before, the water signal dumping down when there is a motion or signal loss. And this become worse and worse when you move to higher p values, and you can see it here. The water signal is really almost dumping to zero sometimes. So motion, we are very much more sensitive to motion indeed. So what you measure your reference value, and then you scale up all the signals you believe they're still good. You do the same for high p values, and then you forget about part of your most affected by motion data. As a matter of fact, the reconstructed spectra at the end will look like this. So this is a typical steam short TE spectrum for prostate. You have citrate at about 2.6 here, creatine, spermine, choline, and myoinositol. And the low p values, you struggle to see the difference between MOCM, so when the motion compensation is run, and the plane reconstructions. But there is a benefit here. You see motion compensation will produce a little higher amplitude, so to say, for these spectrum. The game changer is at high p values, and here you can see drastically this PMA triplet here, how benefit from a motion compensated reconstruction. Of course, I mean, just showing you some results, and then I'll be wrapping up the presentation. We could acquire 6 p values for different healthy cases. You can see how challenging is data quality for prostate as well. This SNR is way smaller than the other one. We could estimate for the first time ADCs for the main metabolites in prostate, describe microenvironment and prostatic compartments. And I stress once more that for prostate, having a robust motion correction and referencing to water was a big deal, because signal is really present in low SNR. So with that, I hope you could enjoy the second part of the talk as well, with some hands-on and 2 examples I've been dealing with water metabolite cycling. And I think I mentioned some of the things also for Roland and the collaborators, the MR group, and our collaborators indeed in Radboud and Cardiff University. With that, thank you all for listening.
Are there questions? I think people are thinking. I have questions. The spectrum that you showed earlier was such a good quality. All they was the same.
Oh, which one? The brain?
Yeah, the part that you processed earlier. So it's really not. It's really nice.
Okay, well taught. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. GMRI.
Yeah.
All these features exist in the new version of the GMRI.
Yeah. But we don't use them on a regular basis. We have our scripts, but just for the purpose of
the demo.
I show them, yeah.
but because it's very nice. So I,
Yeah, you can do.
yeah, we know that they are there, but we've never tested them carefully and,
Really?
yeah.
No, they're, to look at the data, I think it's nice to test the post-processing pipeline. It is as well nice, but then you can have a lot of data. It's better to take bottom and
We also mentioned what you didn't show at the end for the more complex evaluation of the metabolic cycling. We don't do it in MRI because really registering spectra by spectra for the spectra, if you do not just pick the highest peak of the water, you do it in MATLAB and really registration. Also, summing those spectra, you correct them for intensity, they have different SNR, because if you have scaled them up by factor 2, obviously SNR is down by factor 2, and then you can do some weighted averaging, like you do coil combination, you do weighted averaging to get the best SNR for the sum, which you can't do in general.
Yeah, because I've very much appreciated the demo on MRI and to see that all these features are really working because they really work. So, you know, demo.
I think I wanted to show something else, but I forgot my notes sitting down there. So,
Yeah. Then I have a technical question. In your first, among your first slide, and you show the sequence diagram of the simulator. We started working with simulators because it's here. I was surprised to see there's such a big difference between the third and fourth 180 bars. I was wondering why.
the distance.
Yeah, the distance.
Now it's, I'm not the right person to ask why that pose is so far away from the first three, but I've been asking around, and that has been optimized by iterations. And that is the best set of poses and gradients that you should play out to get that signal out. So it is not my design. It is
CMRR design.
yeah.
With timing for
Okay.
CMRR.
Yeah.
In preclinical, we have tendency to put them as close as possible, get the shortest lead.
Yeah, well, I think it makes sense based on the strange thing is that they split the crushes. You don't have crushes symmetric around each pulse pair. It's split up into some of it is in the beginning and some of it refocus only at the very end, which seems to be good for getting rid of simulated echoes, but is actually bad if you extend the echo time. You get diffusion weighting because you have beginning and the end. You have those gradients that compensate, which we don't like.
Any other questions?
On the prostate data, do you see other consequences of motion apart from the lowering of certain
Scaling, young scaling.
other manifestation of motion?
Yeah.
The burden of
No, we just saw the data and that. So we look at the infrared window, the amount of water decay. As soon as we see like severe motion that could not be willing motion, but just happens to happen. That's not much you can do. We just discard the data and apply to be. We typically not run like a huge set of averages. We chop it in portions, we shuffle them to have p values, shuffle them around the measurement, and then we really monitor for any interactive view how things are going.
Do you have, for example, extra lipids in some?
Oh yeah, I haven't shown you any spectral range of lipids. We start from 2 ppm on because things that they are crazy, and either you suppress the lipids, then you go longer with the TE, like an omega pulses or so, or you just have to forget. So 1 to ppm, they're counting for us.
Maybe a question that would interest you as well. So since you're interested in abdominal MRS, I was wondering whether this kind of approach could work in the liver as well.
I think somebody sitting in the second row here has tried diffusion weighted MRS in liver already.
Oh, for diffusion in liver, we have tried, but that was very difficult, too much. Yeah, we couldn't restore The trouble in liver also is that the water decays very fast. P2 is very short.
Yeah.
So you don't really have a good reference signal at high p values because there's no big signal in the first place, even for low p value. Not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it's not can't be done, but it's definitely not. In liver, of course, you could use if it's a pathologic liver, you have the lipids which move. So you have the difference from the lipid signal. So you could actually do the scaling using the lipid signal and not the ones. That's
yeah.
Any other questions? I'd like to thank you all for being here, first of all. And Rudy, thank you very, very much. As usually, a very nice interactive presentation. And the chairman, one of the chairman cakes. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And Roland.
General 7 is coming out next
Oh, that's good to know.
fit day included. I read the time that people use it in starting impression.
And thank you, Roland, for the introduction. It was a very nice, educated talk. So we learned a lot. I learned a lot. So thank you, and see you soon.